When Richard Nixon, for example, goes over to the Kremlin, they're all sitting there clinking their glasses together, they're all members of the club. Whether it be the Hung Society in China, which has its Maltese order, or degree, or the Scottish Rite, or the York Rite, or the Thule Society, or the Grand Orient, or whatever it happens to be, no matter where you go. All of them recognize if I have gone through the Maltese degree in the Scottish, I can go to the Hung Society in Peking and enter in and have access to that degree. The leaders of the world all belong to a little club. And that club, you're supposed to think that they're enemies. No, they aren't. What is the enemy of the Russian government? The Russian people. What's the enemy of the Russian people? The Russian government. What's the enemy of the American people? The American government. What is going to take away your liberties if your liberties are going to be lost? Your government, not somebody else's government. What's the enemy of our government? The American people. They're at war with them, always have been. That's why the Constitution is supposed to hold those guys down. Give them only limited power. Take away the rest. The idea is that they lose and you win. That was the idea of a Constitution. Very peculiar document. Very few people in this world have ever lived there, ever had such a privilege of having a constrained, restrained. You'd watch these things. Watch an IRS agent. He feels no compulsion to obey the Constitution. He says, I'm going to collect the taxes and I'm going to protect them by any means. Whether he's got to raid, steal, break the law, no search warrant, threaten, beat windows in the car, grab what he doesn't care about the rights of the Fourth Amendment by due process of law. He doesn't even care one whit about it. He considers that he's a government agent. He's doing what he has to do for the good of the state, and therefore what he does is moral no matter whether it's legal or not. I've talked to these agents one after another, and they admit that. We're going to collect it no matter how. Don't you understand this is unconstitutional, illegal? We don't care. Do you plan to uphold the Constitution of the United States? We plan to collect these taxes no matter how. Well, if that's the case, then you have to resist them. You're required by law to resist them. Otherwise, you're overthrowing the Constitution of the United States. If you acquiesce to unlawful acts, you are a party to the crime. You know, it was interesting. I had a battle with the state a while back, and they were coming in with some pretty heavy hands. And the next day, two of these agents came back because they had broken several very open and shut crimes. And they wanted to find out whether I had figured out what they had done. And I'm sitting there, and I said, oh, yeah, they came up the front porch. I'm out there, and I said, you know, fellas, I said, do you have any personal animosity towards me? And they said, well, no. I said, I don't have any towards you. I don't know you. You know, madam. These are two state treasury agents. I said, now, you believe that everything you've done is proper and right. I believe you believe that, don't you? And they said, yeah. I said, now, you also understand what you did do, however, was contrary to the Constitution. Well, they admitted that. We just didn't talk off the record. I said, well, want something. I said, you may eventually work me over, but I drive through this town of Detroit and through the state of Michigan with your 17% unemployment, and I go through all the vacant lots of all the land that you've taxed out of business, and I see the automobile companies building the new plants in Windsor, Ontario, Leland, Ontario, down in Ohio. They're building in Indiana. They're building in Kansas City. They're building anywhere. Why? When General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler all have their headquarters in Detroit, they built a plant in Detroit, and they're shutting everyone down. Have you ever thought of why? They're voting against you. You see, the people in Michigan are voting against the state taxing system. How? They're moving out. They're going anywhere. They're fleeing the state. And so what does the state do? Say, wait a minute, we're wrong here. We're losing our tax base. No, they raise the taxes on the remaining ones. So they only run faster. I said, you know, you used to go in Detroit, had tremendous tax base, a very prosperous city. I mean, city budget was tremendous and they had no problem. But then the city got to where they were going to teach these businessmen a lesson. About 20 years ago, they came out after the property owners and so forth, and they started slapping violations, regulations, control on them. They were going to shape them up or ship them out. That was their attitude. And you couldn't talk to one. Before that, you know, an inspector would come in. You sit down and say, no, well, look, Joe, look, I can do this much now, and give me 6 months on that, and I do this, and can't we postpone it? You know, and they'd sit there and say, okay, you do this, and so forth, and then you do that, and so forth, and we'll let this thing go for now. But be ready, I'll be back next year, and we'll look at it, we'll set it up then. You know, that's the way it always was. I've been in the building business since I was 14 years old. I had 2 apartment buildings when I was 17, some 72 units. I've been knowing these guys. Here 20 years ago, I go in there and they said, it's a different world. We get our orders, and we have to obey them. Our orders are to get you. We're going to drive you guys out of business, and we have orders. I know it's a different day. I wish it was that way, you know, but it isn't. We're in a new game. So what they do? They drove them out. They drove them out by miles of them. And they got vacant lots that aren't paying taxes, and the city can't pay its payroll. They can't pay the police. They can't pay the fire. And now, you know what's happened? The inspectors now come out to your property. They call up a week ahead of time. I'm going to be out next Tuesday at 10 o'clock. And this will be an electrical inspection. And we're going to look, let's say, at the first 10 rooms on the west side. All right? Okay. Now, next year, we're going to do the other side. All right? Okay, thanks, Joe. That's the way they are. They don't want you out of business. They come out and say, can we help you out a little bit? Those personal property taxes, now they're a little high. We'll cut those down 20%. Will that help you out? They want to keep you in business. Why? The city's in trouble. They finally got smart, but they had already killed the goose. Now the state didn't learn from Detroit. The state's doing the same thing. They hang on another tax and another tax, and now moving the sales tax to 6%. Wait a minute. All there is just going to be the more flood out. People cannot bear it. And they don't understand. I said, don't you understand the blight and the unemployment you created? And they stopped there and they said, we never thought of that. I said, that's right. But the thing is, even though you're doing it in ignorance, it's still devastating. How are you ever going to repair the injury you guys are doing? You know, my brother came up at that time. He says, you know, you converted those 2 guys. I said, it doesn't really do any good. They got to earn their paycheck. They're going to have to go out and do it again tomorrow. Right? I don't know how a man could morally stay in that tax collection business today. Certainly a child of God could have nothing to do with it. Because if he did what he was supposed to do, he'd get fired. He simply can't survive in it. We're seeing a war on business, small business, leaving everything only in the massive cartels, and to create a dual-class society of the super elite with the massive cartels and the plebeians, the mass, who have absolutely no voice. You see, the only threat that these people have is that middle class. That class of independent individualists who don't belong to their organizations, to their system, and aren't, yeah, see, if you're a self-employed man, you can sit there and say, Charlie, take a walk, you know, but if you work for General Motors, you don't do that. You hit the street. And you're 40 years old, you can't get another job. You lick boots. That's what you do. You lick boots and wait for your pension. And then they give you inflation, so that's worthless when you get it. They eat that up, and you can't even buy that little cottage you thought you were going to retire in. They rob you after all the service by destroying your savings. Destroying that pension through inflation by creating more and more and more confetti. And by the way, this isn't stupidity. As Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, if it happens, we planned it that way. It is following the plan. And the only thing that these people have to fear are those, just like the Caesar. Who did he fear? Those Christians who would not play the game. They wouldn't burn the incense. And you know what happened? They started burning those guys, right? And putting them before lions. And you know what happened? Every time they killed 24 of them down on the arena floor, there were hundreds of converts in the stands. They wondered what kept those guys, what made them do it. How could they face a lion singing a hymn? Those people weren't great, eloquent preachers. They preached with the greatest testimony of all, their blood in that sand. And it brought the Roman Empire down. Do you notice? I told you about the 6 empires up to the Roman Empire. The world was always under one. There hasn't been one since. Do you know why? The salt in the earth. But ye are the salt of the earth. And that salt, as long as it's prevalent, it doesn't have to be in large quantity, it holds back the corruption, the leaven. Any country, look at Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, God, finally, Abraham was arguing with God, and they got down to 10. If you can find 10 righteous men, Abraham, I'll spare it. Abraham started up with a big number. He got down finally to 10. What about the 10? God says, okay, I'll spare it for 10. 10 in both cities. Just give me 10, and I won't do it. There weren't 10. The best he could find was Lot. You see, what they can't stand is when you don't play in their ballpark. And you say, this is what the scriptural position is. Come out from amongst them, be ye separate. You don't have to do anything. Just don't fall down before Nebuchadnezzar. You'll find yourself in the fiery furnace. But notice something else. Sure, those children of Israel found themselves in the fiery furnace because they wouldn't fall down. But they found something else when they got in the fiery furnace. They found there were 4 in there, not 3. And Nebuchadnezzar looks in and sees the 4, doesn't he? And they came out without a singe on them. There was not even the smell of the fire. Now that takes some faith. Daniel didn't have it. And that's hard to get across to people to understand. We can call it as you like, civil disobedience. All right? But we are to obey. We're to obey all the laws, the just and righteous laws, but we are not to obey them in spiritual matters. And we are to obey the law of the land. Just like when I deal with a government agent. I say, is it the law? Well, we won't answer that. Well, you're going to have to answer that. If it is the law, I got to obey. If it is the law, I will obey. I pledge to obey. I promise to obey. If it is the law. You got to do it anyway. Wait, no, that I don't. It's got to be the law. And they refuse to answer. They take the Fifth Amendment every time you inquire of these guys. What? What? Take the Fifth? Oh, yes, you can. That's tough because they'll lie. They'll lie about what you said. They say you said. Because remember, there's no honesty in them. If there was, they wouldn't be there. That's the problem. Well, anyway, I kind of hate to get into the next subject now. Unless, hey, we got coffee? Oh, boy. Is there coffee there? Why, you've been sitting over there hogging that stuff and not telling it? Wow. Let's get some coffee. So let's take up a little bit, and we're talking about the crown. I want to make some explanation about the crown. The crown itself is a committee. The titular head of the Masonic orders of England and America is the monarch of England, which gives you a little problem with Elizabeth, but they kind of make her into a male for a while. And anyway, you get over there in Windsor Castle and you go into the uniting room where they knight all of these guys. And you're going into the lodge room. And you see these guys who faithfully serve into the secret orders, they get all sorts of dubbed and things, you know, and they tap swords on them, and they allow them to put their little emblems around on the wall in this great hall. At every place you walk, in these great cathedrals, for example, in England, you watch these cathedrals, they're fantastic buildings, but they are all cult. They are all cult from the beginning to the end. And we'll take a look at some of them and talk a little more about the lodge while we're into it. And people get all hung up on this, something which bothers me. And maybe it's because it seems clear to me, and maybe I just don't see for the forest for the trees, or whatever the case is. But they get all hung up on this thing called Israel, or the Jews. And they get hung up on it because we obviously, if we look and see the people in the control of the media, banking, industry, in politics, in the courts, and the places of people who are in pornography and one thing after another, and we see the very peculiar actions of our government, which seems to favor one particular group of people over all others, to give them any type of aid and sustenance. It's quite obvious that something is going on that isn't, everything isn't on the even up and up. All right? And obviously there is some sort of combination involved here. Now, if you do look, for example, at the Jews as a group, and I was raised in an almost all Jewish neighborhood, you find there are two kinds of Jews. There are those Jews who really don't seem to be on the inside of anything. They seem to have the problems that other people have. And then there's another clique. This clique doesn't seem to have any problems. Everything is open for them. And every time you get something, like one time we were having a little association meeting of businessmen, and these guys are sitting there, and finally most of the people left, and there were just about 8 or 10 of us left, and they said, now that we're all Jews here, they're going to now sit down and have the plan. You say, I should have kept quiet and watched this thing go, but I said, no, we're not. And they looked at me, they thought maybe that nose of mine, I guess, or something. But these are property owners in Detroit. We look and we see, obviously, the operation of a combination. And we see an inordinate power in this group of people. This inordinate power, you can sit and attribute it to one thing or after another. I would be more inclined, now watch, I'm being careful, I'd be more inclined, from a secular point of view, that these people who are the strongest adherents to the Talmud, to the secret writings, and there's nothing more evil and vile and immoral than the Talmud. And we must remember that Judaism versus Mosesism, we're speaking of two different religions. Mosesism is the following of the Old Testament as a law of practice. Judaism, we know today, is the following of the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud. And you have here two entirely different things. I have met Jews who are Toraic and are not Talmudic. And I've met most that I have run into are Talmudic and not Toraic. Now, is there two different classes? Well, I'm not on the inside. I don't know. I would be inclined to believe there are two different groups, one of which doesn't know what the other is in. But certainly the ones who are in the clique of power ruling that we see, the monetary rule of the media, the entertainment world, these people are all in the Talmudic group. And once you see a body of this sort, because of the very nature of the conspiracy what the Talmud is, and of the very tight combination, and the very grave threats that are involved in this, you build a force that by intimidation without any moral restraint, the Talmud puts no moral restraint. You know why? Because in the Talmud, you are known as goyim, cattle. You are not human. Therefore, the moral requirements of the Bible do not apply to you. Therefore, there is no restraint. You see, a normal person sits and he says, well, there's right and wrong. And he may do wrong, but he knows it's wrong. And therefore, there is a certain constraint on, what he does. He's embarrassed or ashamed or has some feeling of compulsion about this. And so there is, to the normal person, there is a limitation of how far he'll go. But to a person who has bought the position of the Talmud, he is under no restraint at all, except for those who are also under that same Talmud. You now build an organization of people under a conspiracy who are absolutely ruthless merely because there is no restraint. All moral obligation is gone, except to the members of that conspiracy. If you have people who believe that and act upon that, you will start building a very evil and a very powerful machine, which is what we see. Now I want to show you something else. The other day I was listening to the radio, driving along, and they were interviewing this gal, and usually you get these gals in these afternoon programs, you get some real dingbats. Well, this one wasn't. She sounded like she was going to be, and she really had quite a bit of sense. What she has done is write a book about rape and rape victims. And you think, oh boy, this is going to be one of those, another one of those dribbles that's going to go on. And she is saying, when we're dealing with a rapist, and we're talking about the laws of a rapist and so forth, in the penal system, we find a very peculiar thing about a rapist. Never do you have rehabilitation. Never has one ever been rehabilitated, because of the nature of the rapist. And the problem in a court is that the people who are in the jury do not understand what they're dealing with, because the people in the jury, normal citizens, have an idea of right and wrong. A rapist has no such concept. He has no feeling of guilt. He would do it again in a minute, and there is no restriction or restraint on him, and there is no rehabilitation. There is no possibility of ever returning to society. And so when you're dealing with a rape victim, here this gal is in there, and you've got the testimony of these two people. The jury does not understand the nature of the person you're dealing with. The average person has a problem, and that is that most people have some sort of conscience, some sort of restraint in their actions. But when you have a person who is a dedicated follower of the Talmud, he has none. You are not dealing, it's like with this rapist, you're not dealing with an ordinary person. You're dealing with a person and a group of people who have adopted the idea that the only thing that is important, the only thing that is human, the only thing of value is us. The rest doesn't exist. It's like here one day I was listening to some Arabs being interviewed about the Middle East crisis, you know, and these are just Arab students. This is not in the government inside group, all right? And these students were talking along. They said, well, you don't understand. All of them are talking about Arabs and Jews as if we're talking about England and France, or a problem between Norway and Sweden. No, we're not dealing with a thing like that. The problem we're dealing with Israel isn't a problem like Iraq and Iran. Those countries have a borderline. They may fight over it, but they recognize there is one. They may argue where it is, all right, but that there is a borderline. Notice what the Jewish Constitution says. The boundaries of Israel is the entire earth. Now, if the boundaries of Israel is the entire earth, how do you settle a boundary line between Syria and Israel? In a country whose law recognizes no boundaries as being possible. He says you can't sit down with a table and negotiate somebody on a question that can't even exist. You see? We're willing to sit and talk about a boundary line, but the Jews won't draw one and say, this is it. Their Constitution says there isn't. Their Constitution says we have the right to go wherever Jews are and the right to rule. Where's the boundary line of that? That's every place. You see, he says, we're not dealing with a nation like most people think of geographical nations on a map. We're dealing with a nation that they have declared the world is theirs. And you're only a trespasser in here as long as you can hold it. He said, the only boundary line we have is the one we can hold with tanks and guns. There is no other boundary line when we're dealing with people who will not settle. Now, if you see the problem here, you can see the frustration of the Arabs in such a negotiation. Where do you negotiate from? You see, it's the same thing. You can't debate something unless we have a common ground to start with. We got to have an idea of what it is we're going to try to settle to. When one party has no intention of settling, what good is a negotiation? See, this is the problem when you're dealing with a Talmudic Jew or any follower of the Talmud. This is the problem we have when you're dealing with Masons, which are Talmudic. The fact is that they claim that their group and the inside their group is all that's important to support the members of their group, and the rest are enemies, are outsiders, are profane. You're not human. You don't count. Well, this means that now the different people in Masons take this to different degrees of seriousness. But if you're really serious, any person who crosses you, you can take any ruthless action against him without limitation. If you follow the dictates of this organization, that's what it says. If you believe it. Now you see the problem you're talking about when you're dealing with Talmudic Jews. And I want to make a distinction. Now let's make another distinction while we're on this Jewish question. I've never been any place that got so much Jewish question in 2 days as I've got here. I tell you. So I might as well get in full trouble right here. And we've had more scriptural question. Let's take a look a little bit at the source of our Bible and history from the time of we were talking about the history through the Roman Empire and the other things. At the time of Christ, there were 5 basic Bible sects. Most of us think of 3, but there are at least 5, maybe more. The first was the Sadducees. The second, Judaic Pharisees. The third, Hellenic Pharisees. The fourth, Essenes. And the fifth, Nazarenes. All right? The last being called Christians at Antioch. Now, if you have some more, we'll throw them in, but that'll do enough for our analysis for our time. The Sanhedrin, or excuse me, the Sadducee, basically, was the old patriarchal line. And the Sadducee position, or sect, basically also required a temple and a sacrifice, and was based on a national Israel. The Judaic Pharisees were believers in the Torah with certain modifications, but they did not require the temple worship, and therefore were able to survive the destruction of Jerusalem, as the Sadducees were not able to because of the loss of the basic ingredient of their position as the patriarchs. The Essenes pretty well died out and don't appear to be historically of any real potent power. The most important group here, outside of course the Nazarenes or the Christians, was the Hellenic Pharisees, one that you seem to have practically nothing in history about. It's the group you hear the least about. The Hellenic Pharisees basically dominated Judaism in Dispersia. And this Hellenic Phariseeism was not based on the Torah. By the way, Torah, Old Testament, all right? Or the law. What the Hellenic Pharisees were people who used the terminology of Judaism but were Gnostics, versus the Judaic Pharisees who accepted the Torah as God's word, as a revealed word, versus the reasoned word, all right, of the Gnostic Pharisees. The Gnostic Pharisees, like the Masons, which are Gnostic, that the religion they believe in is one, as Churchill said, of reasonable men. It is one that is reasoned out by logic. It is not one that is revealed from God by a direct revelation. So we had this division. Now in Israel, the dominant Pharisees, though these Pharisees who had fallen into the practices of strict traditionalism and the practices of their religion outwardly, as the Lord keeps telling, rather than inwardly, in the act rather than in the spirit. It was still the dominant Pharisee sect in Israel itself. But when you get out all across the world, in Rome, in Greece, in Russia, in Turkey, in Egypt, all of these colonies, if you want, or groups of Jews, the dominant groups there were Hellenic Pharisees, or those in which we call are the Gnostics. Who are these? Or let's take the major group which we're concerned about. In Alexander, Egypt, in 366 BC, Alexander, a Greek, Alexander the Great, founded a city called Alexandria, the second largest city in Africa. It is the major port and of today of Egypt, and it was for many centuries the leading university and library of the world. From its founding in 336 BC, 336 BC, until about the 4th century AD, for some 700 years, every book in the world had to be in its library. It was the citadel of all wisdom and knowledge on this earth. And it was also the citadel of Hellenic Pharisees. The whole faculty was the Hellenic Pharisees. The Alexander, Egypt was a Pharisee colony founded by a Greek in Egypt, but they were the Pharisees, the Hellenic Pharisees, the Gnostics. Now, historically, what we find is the time of, let's say, the 3rd century AD. That school is headed by a man named Origen. Now, Origen and his fellow Hellenic Pharisees decided to write a new Bible. They didn't like the old one, both Old and New Testament. And they did write a new Bible. The Old Testament is known as the Septuagint, or the 5th column of the Hexapla by Origen, 253 AD, the publication of the Septuagint. People say, some say, oh, it's older than that. Well, if it is, we have no record of it being older than that. It's the first time we find it in existence is in Origen's work. But Origen sat down and wrote a New Testament. He wrote a New Testament for a simple reason. He didn't like the Old New Testament, particularly because the doctrines were entirely contradictory. They were not doctrines of reason and logic. They were doctrines of a declaration of a sovereign God. It was a book that claimed to be a revelation, not a logical process of reasoning. And so they rejected that, and they wrote a new book. This new book, which we have, or I should say this new book, in 325 AD, Constantine, who was a pagan Roman emperor, realizing that Christianity was his biggest threat, decided the way to solve the Christian problem is to join it and change it. And so what he did was he marched his army through the river and said they were all baptized. He didn't get baptized himself. Said he had a direct revelation of God. He saw this big red cross in the sky, the Rosicrucian, right, the Rose Christ. There he saw that thing, and he decided with this revelation he was going to become a Christian. So he ordered all the pagan priests to be now Christian priests. He gave all the temples to the Christians. He took all the temple virgins and called them nuns. He converted this thing overnight and created a whole new church recognized by the state and supported by our armies against those people who would hold to the old doctrines and to resist the new conversion of Constantine. Now, this was the founding of what we now call the Roman Catholic Church. It was founded by Constantine in 325 AD, and immediately they had a nice little council up there at Nicaea, and started setting up the rules for the new game. But what Constantine did, he had a man named Eusebius make 50 copies of Origen's new Bible. And these copies were distributed to all the major churches in the Roman Empire with orders to burn all the old Bibles. You've seen that game go on before, right? After all, we're going to create a new religion. Just put it in like the same thing, but we'll just alter it a few thousand places, right? And just like Westcott and Hort, when you go into a seminary, they give you a Greek Bible, and you're going to learn your Greek from Westcott and Hort, or Nestle, which is a translation from that. The only problem with Westcott and Hort, here's Hort says, we made 4,000 changes in our translation. Each translation on its own does not seem to be of any importance. It isn't until you take all 4,000 together that you see the import of what we have done. You see, you go think, well, that's a little change, and that's a little change, and that's a little change. When you get 4,000 of them, what they've done is written a whole new Bible. And now, when you go down to your nice conservative fundamental seminary, they're going into Greek class, and you open up this book and you read Westcott and Hort. Then you look at your King James. King James is wrong there. The Greek says. King James. The Greek says. Look, they've lied in Greek longer than they've lied in English. What makes you think that because it's in Greek it's true? Isn't that what you're supposed to do? The Greek says. Do you realize there's over 400 early manuscripts of the Greek text? 2 agree with Westcott and Hort, or the book they use, that is the Vaticanus. And the rest agree with the King James? Less than 1/4% agree with the New American Standard, the Revised Version, the Reverse Version, and all the rest of the ones you got. The rest all agree. The 99.75% of them agree with the King James. They don't tell you that one, do they? They give you that Westcott and Hort, say, the Greek. I can come up with a whole bunch of Greek texts. The question is, which Greek? I mean, you talk about the question of which English, you got the problem, which Greek? Liars have been at work for a long time. There's nothing new under the sun. Okay, now watch what happened. Of these 50 copies that Eusebius did in Greek, and by the way, Eusebius made a mistake. This is how you can prove it's a forgery. You know how you can prove it? Eusebius didn't know something. That the Bible was not written in classical Greek, but Koine Greek, common Greek, the Greek of the street. It wasn't written in the classical Greek, but seeing Eusebius was trained in classical Greek, he made his forgery in classical Greek. Westcott and Hort didn't know any better, and they took Eusebius's work and left it in classical Greek. And then they made 4,000 changes of the forgery, is what they did. Now you've got the forgery of Origen done with 4,000 more changes with Westcott and Hort in the last century. And then it was obvious because every scholar knew that the Bible was supposed to be in Koine, so they get a guy named Nestle. Nestle comes along, takes this forgery of Westcott and Hort, and changes the idiom into Koine Greek. Same book, change the idiom so it's Koine. Changing classical to Koine does not change a lie to truth. You see? So you get one forgery and a better forgery and a better forgery, you see? But the problem is the whole line started out with Origen, a Hellenic Pharisee, in 253 AD. The King James translators totally rejected that. Now we have 2 copies of Eusebius's work in existence. One is called the Vaticanus, Codex B, and the other is the Sinaiticus, which the Soviet Union gave to the British Museum. Now you can see it in the British Museum, compliments of Joseph Stalin. All right? Don't ask me how Stalin got it. I haven't found that one out. That's always been kind of interesting. I might have stolen it from the Tsars. I don't know how. But anyway, it was found in Mount Sinai in a monastery in Mount Sinai. And the Vaticanus was found when they were cleaning out the Vatican, and they found this book. So we have these 2 copies of Eusebius's work of the 3rd century AD, or 4th century AD, actually. Now later, because they wanted this new forgery in Latin, a guy named Jerome took Eusebius's forgery and translated it into a new Latin forgery. And that's called the Vulgate. Now the Vulgate has been translated by some Frenchmen into the English language, and it's called a Douay. But we have other people who've translated that same Vulgate into the English language, and it's called the New American Standard, the Revised Version. Every single translation in the last 200 years of the New Testament has been translated from the Vaticanus Codex B, a proven forgery. You say, what's the important? The only importance is that in these new translations, the deity of Christ is denied. One little thing, yeah, plus a whole bunch of others that you just simply cannot prove doctrinal positions from, and where the King James is an absolute proof, it becomes now a vague melange of words, a story, without precise proof and terminology. The precision of the King James Bible is astounding as a document. Nothing equals it in the recorded and all the records of man. As to its complexity and its precision, not even a mathematical treatise. So, let's go back here to the Hellenic Jews. What was their idea? They now went out calling themselves, what is the name now? The Greek Christians in Asia, they had a name for themselves. Coptic. The Coptic Christian. Now, what was a Coptic Christian? Well, these were basically the invention in Alexandria, Egypt. What they did is they took young so-called preacher boys, if we'd like, and instead of having them taught, as Paul said, by the preacher teaching the new preacher, not by a seminary, but by a preacher one-on-one, we now wanted to mass produce them. So you put them in an assembly line called a seminary. And we put them into where now one liar can teach a whole bunch of people lies. The only seminary is nowhere in the Scripture. Nowhere is that authorized. Where did it come from? It came because it was necessary for the program. Now, what they did at the great school of Alexandria, Egypt, they opened up this nice class in Christianity. But let's see what Origen said it was going to be. 1, we are going to make Christianity more palatable to the higher classes and to be able to penetrate the wealthier and the more intellectuals. And to do this, we have to approach them on their level. How many times do we hear this? Expediency, you know, we got to alter it for the conditions. What we're going to do, and what they did do, is take the terminology of Christianity, the practices of Judaism, the logic of Greece, and the symbolism of Egypt, and combine them into a new religion. And what we come out of there with is Roman Catholicism. Watch what we have in Roman Catholicism. We have all the emblems and the symbols. If you go to a priest and ask him a religious question, does he say, "Thus saith the Lord," and quote Scripture? Or does he go into a logical discourse? If this, then this, and if this, then this. He has been trained in logic. And his ultimate priest is Aristotle. He goes to the great minds, to the great theologians, to the learned elders of the past, to the wise one or wizards is what he turns to. He never turns to say, "Thus saith the Lord." You see? He does not quote Scripture as the final and absolute authority. In fact, he generally never mentions it at all. He avoids it almost totally, except maybe to drop in a couple little cliches here or there to kind of color it up. Now, what else do we have? The practices of Judaism. Let's take a look at Judaism. Judaism had to have a holy city. You have a holy city. A holy temple, a holy temple. A high priest, a high priest. A Sanhedrin of 70 cardinals. The separate clergy separate from the laity, Nicolaitans, the Nicolaity. The political religious state, the political religious state. The dietary laws, the dietary laws. What we find in Roman Catholicism is Judaism totally in practice, Gnosticism in faith, Egyptian mysticism and the mysteries that they surround themselves with all sorts of visions and miracles and relics and all of this. And Christian terminology slapped on the top of it to cover it all over with a nice piece of frosting. What we see in Roman Catholicism is exactly what Origen said he was going to produce. And what happened up until this time, the churches were producing their own preachers by the pastor, as Paul told Timothy, teach thou faithful men, who, those things that thou have learned of me, teach thou the faithful men, that they might teach others also. Paul said, I didn't go up to Jerusalem and learn from these apostles. The Lord taught me in the desert. And what I've taught you, Timothy, is exactly what I was taught. No more, less. And you are to go out and teach other men what I taught you. No more, no less. That they might teach other men what I taught you. No more, no less. That it was the preacher teaching the young man who was coming up in the ministry. And if one preacher went bad, he spoiled one boy. But what happens when you got a seminary? Now all you have to do is get one lighter in there and crank a machine of false people who don't even know it better, and you fill up the churches, fill the pulpits with people that didn't come from that church, trained off under a seminary of a bunch of so-called wise professors who have the first degree, second degree, third degree, bachelor's, master's, and doctorates, wearing the mortar boards on their head of the masons, right? Advancing by degree in the wisdom of this world. What you have is the lodge. And then you wonder why Roman Catholicism is what it is. It's exactly what it was planned to be. You want to know somebody who doesn't know any scripture at all, talk to a priest. You talk to a rabbi, he'll know 10 times the Bible that a Catholic priest will ever know. Talk to a nun. She hasn't got the foggiest idea what's in there. Why? It's not based on it. Neither the doctrine nor the practice. The doctrine comes from Aristotle. What is St. Thomas Aquinas? What was his great contribution to religion? Thomas Aquinas married the Catholic Church to Aristotle. What was Thomas Aquinas? A philosopher. What we have is philosophy. You talk to a priest and he says, well, now it's like you had a stoplight out here and you're driving down the road and God switches the light. This is the way he gives all of his religious arguments, isn't it? You ever talk to one? Go ahead. They are totally ignorant of spiritual matters. All right? Now, where did Protestantism come from? Well, Catholicism came out of Hellenic Judaism. All right? And it is Hellenic Judaism with Christian terms. The Hellenic Jew uses Talmudic terms, but the ones in disguise called Catholics use Christian terms. But the doctrine's the same. That's why we see the political machine that Roman Catholicism was by their own writings. Here's a group of people. Watch here. Can you imagine? And I'm not, if there's Catholics here, I'm not jumping on you. I'm jumping on the religion. If it hurts you, I'm sorry. If I didn't say it was here not to say what I know to be true, then I would be here under false pretenses, and you're wasting your time and I'm wasting mine. Let's take the 12th century in south of France. The Roman Catholic Church did this. They said that any person who would kill a dissenter in the south of France would be absolved from all sin, both past, present, and future. They could live in total iniquity the rest of their life and go immediately to heaven and never spend a moment in purgatory. You realize under that nice little edict of the Pope, over 12 million were killed in the south of France as a great religious cleansing. Now what does the Bible tell us? How can we tell the church of the Antichrist? Because the blood of the saints are on its hands. Tell me, one thing you know about the Lord's church, it's never killed anybody. It's one of the conditions, isn't it? Well, Luther's got a little problem, and Calvin's got a little problem in that matter. But let's look at something else. We're now told the next big lie. Oh, we've been given a lot of them. You should see why the audiences get smaller and smaller as I keep getting further and further down the line in this stuff. You see, when I didn't know all this stuff, we'd have 1,500 to 2,000 every time I had a meeting. See? But that's all right. It'll be half the size next year. Truth does not draw crowds. People want to have itching ears. They want to hear a lie. Yes, they like lies. They love it. They just flock to it. Now watch what happens. All of a sudden in the 15th century, and if you go back to Revelation, you'll notice what happens. This beast, first thing he does, he tries to persecute those children of the sun-clothed woman. And then he changes his tactic and he pours out a flood. This flood is used in the Bible of false doctrines. He pours out false doctrines. For over a millennium, they tried to slaughter them off by killing them by the sword and the stake and burnings and other sorts of things. But you know what happened with that? The same problem the Romans had. They kept ending up with more than the ones they killed. How do we know that? Because of the number they killed next year and the next century. They had to have more conversions than they were being killed because they always had more to kill. By the very numbers of the Roman Catholic Church's own records show that the conversions were great, and those who resisted and dissented all through the centuries. By the way, from the statistic and analysis, you'll have to conclude that up to the 15th century, the dissenters, the dissenting church, that is the Christian church in Europe that would not bow to the Pope, was always in numerical superiority to the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church was the minority church. The majority church were the dissenters. How come we don't have a record of it? Because they were congregational individuals. They didn't write history books. They just met and did what the Lord said. They didn't build a big world organization and a political power. They didn't have any big massive movements. They were just doing what the book said. Their history is written in their blood. The trail of blood is called. And how do we know of their existence and where they stand? Read Fox's Book of Martyrs. You see? Who do you think they were chopping up? All those centuries. Well, anyway, let's get back and take a look. Yeah, what happens? We have a new game played. Satan now changes his tactics. The direct attack doesn't work. Now we're going to be more subtle than any beast of the field. We now have Calvin, Luther, Zwingli, Knox, the new boys. The Roman Catholic Church now has a new group called Reformers, who now bust up the statues and the emblems, put the Bible out there and let people read it, but stand up in the pulpit and preach every doctrine of the Roman Catholic Church. Called Protestantism. Now, how do we know the Protestant church is a false church from a scriptural point of view? Simple. How can the Church of Christ come out of the Church of Antichrist? The Protestants claim the Catholics are the Church of Antichrist, and they came out of it. Even the Pope at the time of the Protestant Reformation said, we know one thing, the Protestant church cannot be God's church. For if the Protestants came out of the Catholic Church is either God's church or it's the Church of Antichrist. If it be God's church, then they are disobedient for coming out of it. And if it be the Church of Antichrist, how can God's church come out of it? Either way, they can't be. The Catholic Church logically is possible, but with the Protestants it's impossible. And he's absolutely right. The Lord said the gates of hell wouldn't prevail against his church. What the Protestant says that the church was lost for 1300 years, and then Luther found it again. Who were all these people that were murdering during those last 12 centuries out there before Luther came on the scene? Then who did Luther start killing? See, we got to watch the next game. Who was he? He wasn't killing Catholics. And he wasn't killing Lutherans. He must have been killing somebody else. Who did Calvin start killing? The same dissenters. The dissenters have always been. And that group not known by a name, they're known by a doctrine and a practice that has never changed from the very beginning till this day. It has always remained the same. And they've always been independent. There are people that you do not see. They don't build big edifices that you drive past and see this great, wonderful building with the stained glass and the big pipe organ. Tell me where the pipe organ came from. Do you find it in the Bible? It came from the Roman Catholic Church. Where did all these robed people come up there chanting away at you? Do you find that in Scripture? Where did it come from? People up there standing up front entertaining you. Where did you get it? You got it from someplace else with Scripture. I don't see one jot or tittle in that book on those subjects, do you? What we end up was with an organization made up of all sorts of traditions of men. And what are we told? The tradition of men make the Word of God of none effect. You know what the apostle tells us? The traditions of men make the Word of God of none effect. We practice all sorts of things. We have the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, we have the choir, the junior choir, we have the Little League, we have the Sunday schools, we got everything you can think of. Except one thing, the Word of God. It's missing. But that's all right. You know what happens? You can tell something. A church with more and more activity has the activity because the gospel is missing. The church that has the gospel, preach the gospel, they don't have activity. Those people find something they want there and come there for what they're getting. They don't need activity. The reason you have activity is you got to have some reason to have them there when you have nothing else. Those places are always spiritual deserts. You see? Always. The Roman Catholic Church, what is it? It's got candles and bells and genuflexes and ordinances and all sorts of things and great statues and things, and they got every kind of meeting and picnics and potlucks and bingo, and they're selling this raffle and this thing and that thing. That priest stands up there for 30 minutes giving you the whole menu of the activities of the week. He doesn't give you one whit of the Word of God. You got it full of activity. Full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. I mean, that's what it is. And by the way, that's what Satan pours out. And that has been far more effective than anything that, of all of the slaughterings of the 1.5 millenniums preceding it. All the persecutions were never successful as Martin Luther in destroying the Christian faith. You know, sometime I'm going to find out why they make this whole machine, and obviously the two of them don't even go together. Oh, what do you want? Oh, okay. This here. I just got those Bell and Howells figured out. Figured they were worthless. There were 2 Bell and Howells, and now I got this thing. All right. I gotta remember how to do this. That's for size, and this is for looks. Okay. Let's go and take a look now at the Morals and Dogma, which is the basic handbook of Masons in our country, in the English-speaking world, written by a man named Albert Pike. I hope, have I been clear on this thing I've been talking about? I have a history here of the Hellenic Pharisees. And we're going to get into Gnosticism here, and you'll see it being repeated. And watch the terminology. Morals and Dogma, this man was obviously trying to write a book that kind of looked and sounded like the Bible. He gets very wordy because he has very little to say, and he has to use a lot of words to say it in order to be able to write a big book so it looks impressive, as most people do. If you take the average textbook, the average book, so I was telling people about when I studied in my doctorate. Everybody's got to write a book, and the book has got to be at least 600 pages long if you're a professor. What have you got for 600 pages? You don't have anything to say for 600 pages. The whole thing is nitwit to begin with. There's only 4 things to say. So how do you say 4 things in 600 pages? That takes skill. See, if you've got a lot to say, it's easy to write a book. When you have very little to say and got to write a big book, now that takes work. You take the textbook, and you can take the, see, when I would say we would have literally hundreds and hundreds of books to read, supposedly, every week assigned to us on a doctoral program. Well, obviously, it's impossible. Most of them just cheat and don't read them, and they get caught. But after a while, the key to being a doctoral candidate is to learn the trick. See, it isn't a matter of learning the things. If you learn the trick, that's what you want to say. How smart are you? Are you smart enough to catch on, or are you dumb enough to actually do what we told you? Now, the first thing you realize that you can go through a book, look through the index, and you can find out where the 3 or 4 things that this guy is going to say in that book is. You go down there, looking at only the first paragraphs, each chapter. Why? He's going to give you a clue what's in there. If it's not, you don't see anything in the first paragraph, skip the chapter. There's nothing in the whole chapter. Because he's had to outline it according to the rules of outline, which says the first paragraph tells you what the chapter is going to be about, the last chapter tells you what it was about, and in the middle of the middle chapter, you have the fact of what it is about. Now, if there's nothing in the first paragraph, there can be nothing in the chapter. So you go, nothing new there. And you go just like this. Ah, there's his point. Before chapter, right there, okay? Put that on a 3x5 card. That's good. There. 2 minutes later, you put the book away. 800 pages. I got 3x5 card. It's got 2 lines on it. That's everything that's in that book. And I get my little stack of 3x5 cards. I take a stack of books every night, 2 stacks like this, put it in my carrel, go right down them, 9 o'clock, I'm heading home. I got my little stack of 3x5 cards. I go in, the professor's sitting up there with his 3x5 cards. Crane, what did Brown say on the theory of such and such and such? Pull out Mike Brown. Oh, sir, Brown said, well, I don't have it on this card, it just says G. Turn to G, because all of the guys they only got 4 different positions on this thing. And all of these books are only talking about the same 4 things, and there's only 3 possible positions in each. There's only 12 possible answers. I got A to G. I just go to my little G card, read G card. I'll read that for anybody that find a G on his card. I read the same card because they agree. Now, if I want an opposite position, take B cards. Yes, but White says, boy, you sound good. Well, yes, Brown agrees with that. But you know, White, in his discussion back in 1937, in his Harvard Business Review article on page 267, made this statement. You sound real brilliant, don't you? I got my 3x5 cards. He's got his. That whole stack of books comes out in a stack of 3x5 cards, about 20 cards, with not 200 words. I got the whole thing. You learn how to play the game, right? Now, when you take the Bible, you don't do that. With that Bible, you've got 500 years of studying to break into it nicely. And you say, wait a minute, I can't work all that to know what the Bible's saying. Don't worry about it. Every time you study the Bible, it'll give you more and more and more and more, and you'll always get a full measure well shook, and there's always more for next time. You'll never run out. It's a wonderful book. You can go back and back and back and never end it. You'll never exhaust it. That's why it's so wonderful. You read any other book, any book written by men, and when you got done with it, you throw it over. Well, I got that book, right? You know, I don't go back and read it again. I know what's in there. But the Bible, you go back and read, and it's fresh the next time. It's always fresh. There's nothing else like it. Nothing on the face of this earth ever been known like that book. That's one of the reasons why. Well, let's go in and see what more Albert Pike's got to say. Well, I should tell you a little bit about old Albert. Now, Albert was a rather obese man. In fact, he was downright fat. And Albert was a Confederate general. He was the only Confederate general to lose with superior numbers against the Yankees at the Battle of Pea Ridge. So it gave him one distinction. He wrote some 1,600 volumes in his lifetime with a quill pen. He knew all the ancient languages, wrote in all the ancient languages fluently. Where he got his education and knowledge is a mystery. I believe he got it directly from his God, which he claims Lucifer. But either way, if you want to think he had this ability on his own, go ahead. Of course, most of the stuff in which he wrote the great volumes are direct copies of other people's work, as he just took pieces here, and the other place. And you can just say he was one of the most prolific copiers of all time. But either way, Albert Pike designed 14 of the 33 degrees of the Scottish Rite. He was the supreme sovereign commander of the 33rd, of which he was the first sovereign commander. And he is considered in the Masonic circles of the Scottish Rite the paragon, the top authority on the subject of masonry. If you read in Lady Queensborough, she has a lot more to say about him, all of which I can't verify, and I don't believe she could either. So, being that as it may, let's go to his own writings. It's a lot easier, you see, to take his own writings rather than what people say about him, because now you can pin him to the wall. There are 32 chapters in this book. You might figure out why, each one of which has a different title. The first one's called The Apprentice. All right, the next one's called The Fellow Craft. And the next one is called The Master. Why? The first degree is Entered Apprentice. The second degree is The Fellow Craft. And the third degree is The Master Mason. Each of the degrees are titled after the 33rd name of that degree. So here we are, chapter 1, paragraph 1. And let's just read what he has to say. Force unregulated or ill-regulated is not only wasted and void, like the gunpowder burned in the open air and steam unconfined by science, but striking in the dark, its blows meeting only the air, they recoil and bruise itself. It is destruction, not growth and progress. It is Polyphemus, blinded and striking at random and falling headlong among the rocks of it, sharp rocks by the impetus of his own blows. It sounds like reading Robert Welch, doesn't it? He wrote the same type of style, the same garbage. Of course, Robert Welch is 33rd degree. Member of the club. But anyway, what is all that saying? All that words. Well, if we take out the words and come up with he's saying this. That force, unrestrained or controlled or confined, is waste. All right? Premise 1. Let's go to paragraph 2. The blind force of the people is a force that must be economized and also managed as the blind force of steam. He's saying the same thing again, right? Repeating himself. Lifting the ponderous iron arms and turning the large wheel has made the bow of the rifle cannon in order to weave the most delicate lace. It must be regulated by intellect. Let's stop. Yesterday we talked about assumptions. What is the assumption here? That the force of the people is blind. The blind force of the people must be regulated by intellect. The premise number, first paragraph is that force must be regulated and controlled or else it's waste. Paragraph 2, that the people's force is blind, therefore the intelligent ones must control them. You know what we have? Communism, slavery, dictatorship, the elite class of the aristocracy ruling those poor little dumb bunnies who are going to do the wrong thing. You don't know what's good for you. You have to be told and shown and forced. We got to take what you produce away from you and give it back to you in the way you should have it, so you don't do wrong, because we are all wise and we know best. What do you think you'll have government schools? To teach you a religion. What is it? That the government is God? As Nietzsche said, the state is God. What do you mean? Who do you trust to take care of you when you get old? Are you going to trust God, or are you going to trust Social Security? Who is going to solve your social problems, your racial problems, your health problems, your moral problems, your family problems? A government program. They got a program for a pollution problem. You name the problem. You think of a problem. If you don't, they're going to come up and invent one next week and put it on TV for you and be you convinced that you got a new problem you didn't even know you had, and a government agent is going to have to control you in another aspect of your life in order to protect you from this problem they just invented. Now, one of their problems with their problems is this. The only government solution to a problem is to give money to it. Now, if you give money to a drunk, does he get sober? They have been giving now for the last 70 years money for women for having illegitimate children. Do they have less today than they did 70 years ago? Why, when you pay people for not working, do they go to work? Common sense would say otherwise, but the government never entertained a concept of common sense, because that is not what they're interested in. They're not interested in the system working. They're interested in control and regulation, not in the well-being of the citizenry. The solution to practically every problem the government talks about is for the government to get out of it. It would go away. They have been pushing racial differences and race, and race hatred on the television and newspapers so long. Everybody's got race hatred because they've sold it to you. They talk about running down the blacks. Well, what do you mean when you say the blacks must be hired because they're black? The black has got to be given this right because he's black. Look, the government is supposed to be impartial. What they've done is say the blacks are inferior, that the blacks can't make it, that blacks need to have special privileges. They talk about under the general welfare clause, the right to give. Notice what general welfare is. It's not special welfare. The government has no authority in the Constitution for special welfare to give to any group or a particular person, but only general welfare, to build roads that are a benefit to everybody, to do something that benefits all, not to benefit this group or that group or this group or selected because it's blind or aged or old or north or south or black or white or yellow or green. You see? The government is to stay out of those matters. The economy will solve that. Those things are decided and solved in the marketplace. Now, I happen to be in a business and most of my customers are black. I don't mind what color the money comes from, what color, it doesn't make any difference to me. I'm not going to turn down money because it came out of a black man's hand, if it's a businessman. See? There's no racial prejudice in the South against the blacks. In the business world, they all try to get the sales. Now, it might be in their home, it might be down at their church, but not, boy, at the marketplace. Boy, they're all trying to sell to anybody will pay. Now, one of the things we're told in Masonry is that it's not a religion. Well, let's say Albert Pike. Masonry, like all religions and all mysteries, and alchemy, conceals its secrets from all except the sages and the elect, and uses false explanations and symbols to mislead those who deserve to be misled, and to conceal the truth from all, what it calls light, from those who would draw away from it. What is he saying? Masonry lies. Masonry is a religion, and it lies and conceals the truth. That's a moral group, and here your spiritual leaders and your political leaders are members of that, and you wonder what's happening. Here's the New Age magazine. This is the 33rd Degrees magazine, September 1950. I, for years, took subscription to this thing. My father was a Mason, and I kind of think they sent it to me thinking I was one. But anyway, I got it for many years. Finally, what happens is it's the same drivel one month after another. You take over, seen one, you've seen them all. I can pick up any issues. And I say, this is the first one that I ever had. And so I'll just take out of this one. And if you, I've got hundreds of them, and I can do this in any issue. I can prove what I'm going to prove to you in this one. So why waste time going through 100 of them? Here's in the back cover. The Supreme Council favors the American public school, nonpartisan, non-sectarian, efficient, democratic for all the children of all the people. Doesn't that sound good? It sounds like apple pie and mama, doesn't it? All 100% American until you read it carefully. Now let's read it carefully. The Council favors, this is the Masons, the American public school. That is government school. The government is going to raise your children. No, my daughter's 26. My son is 11. My daughter did go to a public school for 2 years, or government school. She was in the 3rd grade, some 20 years ago or so. She was having a little trouble in arithmetic. So I went down because I've had fairly good mathematical background and have a doctor's degree and so forth. I thought I was quite capable of teaching my 8-year-old arithmetic. You'd think maybe I could do it, you know. So I went into the school and I said, to the teacher, I'd like if you would send home with Kim her arithmetic book, and I could help her out in arithmetic and she could do better. We do not want the parent interfering with the education of the child. And I said, oh, would you tell me that one again? I want to be sure I heard that. We don't want the parent interfering with the education of the child. The school was in session in the middle of the day. I opened the door and I said, Kim, come out here. She pops around. She says, you can't take her out of school. I said, ma'am, you get in front of me and I'll stomp right over you. I'll flatten you. That's my daughter and it's not yours. That doesn't belong to the state. You can't have her telling me that that child belongs to her. No, over my dead body. I want to tell you the only thing is, you just tell them no. You see, we go along. We wonder what's happening. We've gone along. We've gone along. We've gone along. They know you're going along. It's the easy route. You go along, and one day you wonder how we got here. Do you know how the English Revolution started? A nobleman in the south of England, because the tax is 1% per person, he said, I will not pay this percent, and he had his head cut off for a penny. And it brought the king down. It brought down divine right of king, and it brought down the immunity of government from prosecution. That king was put into trial, and he was executed for a penny. You realize the tea tax is only a penny per American that brought on the American Revolution? Not a penny. You stand on the principle What would happen if the Americans stood on the principles of that Constitution? Do you think we'd be where we are now? Everybody who said, oh, well, you know, what can we do about it? They're the ones that caused it, not the conspirators in Washington, a people who did not stand up to them and say, no, I won't. What are you going to do about it? We're going to put you in jail. Okay, I got a lot of books to read, and I haven't got around to. So I spend some time in jail. Well, it's pretty rough in jail. So it's rough in jail. I've been in the Army. It's rough there, too. What are they going to do, kill me? I'm going to die anyway. Put me in a rack? Okay, let's go down to the rack. Go ahead, see what he's going to get you. He's going to get you nothing. The answer on the rack is, no, I won't. You know, they don't know what to do with you when you say, no, I won't. They all sit there. Well, we're going to prosecute you. Fine, go ahead. We'll put you in jail. Okay. The answer is no. No now. No next week. No next month. No forever. No is the answer. What reason? No, it's nothing at all. The answer is no. You don't have to be bright. No. That's the one thing the club can't stand. You won't play in their ball game. No. What threats have they got? If you're scared of them, and I'm going to tell you something. I've had threats in my life, and I've had attempts in my life. I've had some very attempts you wouldn't believe. And I want to tell you what's happened. They're the greatest times in my life. Do you know why? I've had these people, and I won't go into examples right now, but I know this. And sometimes I lose my faith in the matter, and I get scared like everybody else gets scared, you know? I mean, look, I'm normal, I'm human like anybody else, the rest of you. And you sit and watch the powers of these guys, they got power. But I'll tell you something, and when I come to my senses, I sit and say, no, Lord, thou hast more power than they. Thy arm is not short. If I be in thy will, you'll sustain me. And if I'm not, all right, come what may. And I've seen the Lord take, in cases in which we had time to go into it, and I don't care to do it right now, of a direct reversal of the facts so unbelievable that there is no question of the direct intervention of God's holy hand holding back, reversing. I've had a case where they're putting me in jail, and I'm sitting there, and these people have a whole conspiracy in the city government, and even the city council chairman saying, don't touch that guy. Anybody who walks in the court with him is through in this city. And you know what happened? I sit there and say, Lord, thou knows the way out of here. And here the head of the building department pulls my files, goes down to the incinerator and shoves them in and throws a match to him and walks out and retires and goes to Phoenix and burned them all. I don't know where he is, but that was on his heart. You see? But the Lord knew. I've seen this thing dozens of times. Now, every time of that, that's one of the greatest times that can happen to you. Those things happen. They're wonderful. You've seen the direct hand of the Lord in your life. You know why most people have never seen the direct hand of the Lord? They've never stood. They have never seen the blessings. They'll never have the blessings because they've never taken a position. Now, you got to step out there, boy, and I tell you, get out there sometimes on a thin limb. Until you get out in that limb, you're never going to see. You see, that's sustaining. Hey? Well, anyway, getting back here with public schools. We're not getting very fast in this one, are we? The American public school, nonpartisan, non-sectarian. Well, let's take this one now, sectarian. What does the word non-sectarian mean? Antichrist. There's only one religion in the world that is sectarian. The Christian faith in that Bible. All other religions are non-sectarian. Protestantism is non-sectarian. Catholicism is non-sectarian. Judaism is non-sectarian. Hinduism, Buddhism, all of these are not. What do you mean by sectarian? Sectarian, separate. It says you are to come out and have no part of the rest. That's what a sect is. One who set themselves apart and separated from. All the others say, let's all get together and let's find a common ground of understanding. We can all get together and agree on the truths that we all hold in common. We can get together in this nice council and have this nice Mason represent us. The answer, the Christian answer is, no, I don't need it. You people go your way. I'm going to go my way. Now, the one thing they don't want, they favor non-sectarian, non-Christian, efficient, democratic, mob-cratic rule. That if the majority wants to do something, that makes it right. Look at the majority of the people in this world wanted to commit every sin. In fact, all of us do in our heart. We have the capacity of every sin. And that's what in our heart we want to do. Most of us don't do it for one or two reasons. We're either afraid of God or we're afraid of being exposed and losing our reputation. But the fact of the matter is that all people who want to go out and get drunk doesn't mean drunk is moral. If the majority of the people want it lawful for us to go out and to commit incest or rape, does not make it moral or lawful in God's eyes. Our government was formed to prevent, the Constitution was written to prevent democracy. You will not find it in the Constitutional Declaration of Independence. It was the very form of government they were trying to prevent. This country was to be a constitutional republic. What do we mean by a constitutional republic? A government under law to protect the individual from the majority, from the mob, to protect that single black man from all the white men, to protect that single citizen from everybody, except by due process of law. This concept today of democracy, that if the majority wants to do it, it's okay, is an anathema to the Constitution and to the Word of God. A total reverse of the thinking of a century ago in this country. Democrat. For all of the children, compulsory, forced upon you by us, who are your superior rulers, are going to force you to send your kids to our brain laundry to learn our religion and not to and to learn all about evolution, to learn about every error that we want to teach them. They are not yours. They belong to us. Now that looked innocuous, but look what happens when we take it apart. Here's an article in the same magazine, written by, this is God's Plan in America, written by another 32nd degree Mason, Mr. Smith of New Orleans. He goes through this article and he's talking about all of the religious wars and what God's plan is for America. Let's take a look at just part of it. And by the way, we can take any paragraph and get about the same thing. I just picked this one because it's just a little worse than the rest of them. King George of England is a Masonic light to his Anglo-Saxon people. By the way, what they're teaching is Anglo-Saxon superiority, that they are the chosen race. This is a Masonic doctrine. Just as providence, notice it's a capital P in this providence, so we're talking about a deity, aren't we? Obviously, it's a God. This is a person, has chosen because it did choose. Therefore, we're talking about a person, a willing person, who is a deity with a capital out front, okay? Has chosen the Jewish race, the children of Israel, to bring the world righteousness by carrying the 10 Commandments. Wait a minute. Let's stop here. Is that right? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with it? No, we're only jumping. Let's just get out of that one right now. What's about it? Did the 10 Commandments bring the world righteousness? It condemned the world. Paul said he was condemned by the law. The law brought condemnation. Why? No one has kept it. If we broke it in any part, we've broken it all. Is there anybody who hasn't? Which one here is not guilty of every single sin in the Old Testament under the law? There isn't one. The 10 Commandments didn't bring anybody righteousness, regardless who it was carrying it. All right? I'll get to the fundamental doctrine, which emphasize, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Is that the emphasis of the 10 Commandments? What is the emphasis of the 10 Commandments? Quote it. You shall have no other gods before me. What did the Mason teach? That all gods are the same God. By any other name, it's the same thing. Right? God has his name above every name. All right? So also providence, whoever this God is, they don't want to tell us the name of, they're trying to hide it, see, has chosen the Nordic race to unfold the new age of the world, the Novus Ordo Seclorum. You can find that in the back of your dollar bill too, right? The new order of society. Der New Order, Ein Reich, Ein Volk, Ein Führer. What was the name of the Third Reich's movement? The New Order. Then we had the New Frontier and the New Great Society. Adolf Hitler called his the New Order. That's what they call theirs, the New Order. Turn the page. Doesn't get any better. As stated before, God's plan in America is a non-sectarian plan. Wait a minute. Since the God of the Bible demands sectarianism, then who is this God here who's got God's plan for America? It obviously cannot be the God of the Bible. We must be talking about somebody else. You see the point? Because whoever this God is, his plan is non-sectarian. All right? Our Constitution is non-sectarian. Well, they'd like to say that one. Our great American public schools. Did you realize that there are great American public schools? God's chosen schools. Did God choose the great American public schools? I would like to see that in my Bible. What does God command? Who's to teach the children? The Father is to raise those children up in the fear and admonition of the Lord. And what are they to be taught? To fear God and to eschew evil. Wait a minute. You see how everything gets twisted? Every last jot and tittle? Here we have that these great American schools are God's chosen. Well, if they are God's chosen school, I know one thing. I know who their God is. Their chosen schools are non-sectarian. The great spirit behind this great nation is non-sectarian. All right, let's go to the next verse. Our great American public schools have never taken away from any child the freedom of will, the freedom of spirit, or the freedom of mind. This is our great American public schools tell these little children to be their natural selves and develop themselves, to go down here and play and just do whatever comes to your little old heart. And you just come and we're just going to let you evolve along. You know what they become? They become their natural selves, which is brats. Ignorant, evil brats. Look, I want to tell you, if any of you are parents, you know one thing. You didn't have to teach your child to sin. That child learned how by the crying and turning on the whimpers to get you to hop to a hoop before he could ever talk. He did it by the first day. He started figuring you out and figured how to get around you and how to disobey you, and they couldn't even crawl. You never had to teach a child to lie, to cheat, to steal, or to commit any sin. You had to whip goodness into them while a lot of understanding laid in the proper place of application. That is the divine reason the great God, our King, again another name, he won't tell us the name, right, has chosen the great American public schools to pave the way of the new race, the new religion, and the new civilization that is taking place in America. What are they saying? The purpose of these great American public schools is to bring in a new race, a new religion, and a new civilization. Have you seen that happening? That is the purpose. And where is the engine of drugs? The engine of immorality, of adultery, of right now, 1 out of every 10 teenage females will become pregnant this year. 1 out of 3 will be pregnant before she is married or turns the age of 20. That's the result of the great American public school system. That's the destruction of the family. The basic political unit. And how was this done? They took your money by force and forced you to send your kids to this thing. Those teachers aren't answerable to you. You don't count. You only bred them. Watch it. Any mother, father, or guardian who is responsible for taking away the freedom of mind, freedom of will, or freedom of spirit is the lowest criminal on the earth. Not a rapist, not a murderer, not an oath breaker, not a conspirator, but a mother, father who teach their morals and their religion and faith to those children. That's the lowest criminal in the world, according to that article, right? You talk about evil? You talk about gross, unlimited sin? Take a look at that. This is the 33rd official magazine of the New Age. Because they take away from that child the God-given right to become part of God's great plan for America. The dawn of the new age of the world. The upward reach of mankind. Let's take a look. Here is the cathedral at, is it Cologne, isn't it? Cologne, yeah. Take a look at that building. All the statuary, all of the spires, the buttresses. Fabulous. I walked through down the roof of Salisbury Cathedral up there, the solid lead roof, massive thing going on. You take a look at that building. Unbelievable. Built in the 11th century, 10th century. Unbelievable architecture. You can see the builders of that considering themselves to be kind of elite and superior to the rest. They also, because they traveled from one area to the other, were not part of the nation or land in which they were in. They were transitory. And therefore they combined together in a club or guild to set up a nation outside of a physical nation. Just like Israel. The Jews have bound together to form a nation, a conspiratorial nation, that did not need land for the last 1.5 millenniums. A nation without a geographical location. The same with the guilds and the Masonic guilds. And, you know, those are quite little buildings. Let's go down to the lodge hall. When this guy comes into the lodge, the apron, by the way, is to cover up God in this world. And it's exposed in certain places before the altar as you expose the divine part. That's why a female cannot be a Mason. She doesn't have the right ingredients. The fellow comes in with a blindfold on called a hoodwink. He's hoodwinked coming in, and he'll stay hoodwinked as long as he's there. He has a rope around his neck called a cable tow. This tow binds him. And when he swears to the oath, he's now bound to the oath by that cable tow. They take the rope off because now he has an invisible rope. And when he takes the second rope, oath, there'll be 2 ropes around his neck, and the third 3. He is now treble bound. And he's bound for life, forever. Now, it's an interesting thing. The Masons teach this, that once you're a Mason, you're always a Mason. The Lord Jesus Christ himself cannot get you out. Now I want to show you something. We have 2 people in the Bible who are Masons, Paul and Moses. We have a very interesting little verse in Jude, and I think this is the reason why that Council of Nicaea was trying to get Jude out of the Bible. Here's a verse totally out of context. It doesn't seem to fit. It sticks out because it doesn't fit. You know, most of the verses fit into a context. But here's a verse that just, bam, hangs right in there, slap dab on the page, and you wonder, what does that fit into what else about it? Verse 7. And when Michael contested with Lucifer over the body of Moses, he dareth not bring forth riling accusation. Wait a minute. What happened here? When a Mason becomes a Mason, he wears that pure white apron. And that apron must be on him when he dies and is buried. And his fellow Masons stand around that grave at the graveside ceremony with no one else allowed to look in, because you're not to understand what's going on. And they claim that body in the name of him whose grave this sprig marked. That's Lucifer. They claim that body in the name of Lucifer. Now, I don't know what this means, to be quite frank with you. I can't explain it. But Lucifer, for some reason, wants that body. And they lay claim to it. And Lucifer claimed to Moses' body. Why Moses? For Moses was brought up in all the wisdom of Egypt. What was the wisdom of Egypt? He was brought up in the wisdom religion in the mystery rites. He was initiated in that great temple, probably the Great Pyramid. He was brought up as the son of Pharaoh. Now, Lucifer was saying, I own that body. And Michael was saying, no, the Lord has saved, he is saved to the uttermost. Lucifer's claim does not have precedence, nor any lodge. I'm sitting there one time, the first time I had learned anything about masonry, I was just reading this little book here, this little book, Captain William Morgan's. First thing I ever saw, and I was just reading that. Actually, I was given a series of talks every hour, and off an hour. And I was sitting out there reading this thing, and finally I got to lunchtime, and there's a bunch of Baptist preachers. And I was sitting at this lunch table, and I said, Mahabone. That's the password of a master mason. One head snapped around and looked at me, and I said, got one. I knew nothing about masonry outside. I'd read about half of that little book. And I got down there and I got that preacher off to the side and I said, this is a big lunchroom. And we're standing over there, on the side. I said, look, Pastor, I want to know something. I want to know what this masonry is. I want to know. He looked at me just like this and he clenched his fists and he says, it's from the pit of hell. And I can't get out. I said, what? They won't let me out. Once a Mason, always a Mason. You can't get out, and Christ can't get me out. I said, you are making Lucifer sovereign and Christ subject? I hadn't come across the verse in Jude at that time, which helps out now. I would have used it, you know. But I knew that wasn't right. The Lord's told him that, but that can't be true. Not with my Lord, that can't be true. He comes neither shot or unshot. He comes in there in search of light with the tools of masonry pressed to him, and he goes and does oaths. Notice again, you always have this holy book in this altar, but then on top of that is the tools of masonry, which are superior to any holy book. When he comes in this lodge, this is not quite right. He should have a hat on. Up 7 steps, we'll find the worshipful master, always under the sunburst. That G iridescent means generative power at the time of impregnation. Well, I have here the terrestrial world surrounded by the serpent and the celestial world. The worlds, what's that? This is, again, 1st degree, 3rd degree. The candidate is supposedly in an enactment, killed and buried and then raised again in the newness of life by 3 ruffians, Jeblah, Jebalu, Jebalem. Now, the Jeblah, Jebalu, Jebalem are takeoffs of the mystic word Jebelo, in which the Masons pray, and they pray in the name of Jebelo, Jebelo, Jebelo. Now, I'll tell you what it means. J, Jehovah, Bel, Baal, O, Osiris. The 2 pillars supporting the true God, which is Baal, the keystone, is the 2 false gods, Jehovah and Osiris. Now, those 3 names are worked in the 3 ruffians, Jeblah, Jebalu, Jebalem. The last letter changing, the A-U-M, the Am of the Hindus, the Am of the prayer of the Hindus. They got them all. Jehovah, Baal, Osiris, and Am. You know? They don't care. They'll stick anything in there. These people have absolutely no discernment and no respect of God. They raise him in the newness of life. In the old days in the pyramid, they wait 3 days and raise him. Nowadays they get him back up the same night by a lion's grip. They raise him into newness of life in the name of Lucifer. And he is now born again. He's not born again till the 3rd degree when he's raised in newness life. This is his resurrection. Do you see what I mean by the false direct blasphemy? Every lodge hall, no matter how small, that sunburst has got to be there. Here we are in Washington, D.C., a 33rd degree temple, 33 columns, 33 feet high, under a truncated pyramid. Always the Masonic Lodge must operate in the upper room. And it's going to be above the police station, above the fire department. It can't be in the basement. No, it's got to be in the highest place. It can be a 1-story building, but it cannot be the basement. Let's go in. We're walking upstairs here, and this is the Tyler's door. We're now on the west, in the entrance of going into the Great Hall and the 33rd degree. And there we are. We come in. Now, actually, you see, we're here looking back towards the west. And if we will look here, we'll see on the walls the serpents. You see the serpents? All the serpents all the way around the room. Read in Ezekiel 8. Ezekiel 8, God takes Ezekiel in a vision. That's during the Babylonian captivity. Ezekiel's in Babylon. And God takes him to Jerusalem. Whether he takes him physically or not, I do not know. Scripture doesn't say you can believe whatever way you want. It really doesn't make any difference. If he didn't say it's not important. But he takes Ezekiel and says he's going to show Ezekiel why he put Israel into captivity. And he takes him to the temple, to his holy temple, and he says, see what thou seest here. Look at the abomination. They have put the idol of jealousy, the image of jealousy, a statue, in the gate of my temple. They set up a statue. God says, let's look further. Look here what thou seest. And he saw this hole in the wall, and he says, dig, go in there. And he goes into the secret chamber under God's temple in Jerusalem. And here in this temple, they had the serpents on the walls in the basement. And the 70 elders of Israel, the leaders of Israel, are down there practicing the secret rite, saying God does not see what we do here. God doesn't see us. It's in secret. I want to tell you, God knows the secret places. There is no secret God doesn't know. He knew everything that went on in that room, in that basement of that temple. And they did too. They got the serpent still on the walls here in 1981, right there in Washington, D.C. It changed not. And they had the book that tells them. And he says, is this a light thing that they do? This abomination of the elders of Israel? He says, let's look further and see the abominations. He takes them up, and here's the women weeping for Tammuz, weeping for Christmas. I want to tell you what, you tell people under conviction, they got to give up Christmas. The guy says, fine. The kid says, oh, great, doesn't bother him. And the woman, oh, we love so much. Oh, we've had such good times. And oh, my family is going to thank you. What are we going to do? We can't invite them over, and they can't go over there. And the women have a terrible thing with Christmas. They really choke up on that one, weeping for Tammuz. And it says, look what they do. They put the sprig, the evergreen, to the nose. Is that a light thing, God says to Ezekiel, that they do? He says, look further. Here are the 24 elders with their back to the temple, facing the rising sun, facing Baal with their back to my temple. And then he sends the rider the inkhorn, and the four, and with the slaughter weapons in their hand. And he says, put a mark in all of Israel, of all of those who weep for the abominations that they do here. And all who do not have that mark on the forehead, slaughter, slay everyone, show mercy to none, and start with those 70 guys down to that temple. Get them first. Now that's what God thought of it. Oh, but God is just a forgiving, good old daddy boy. Just kind of goes along with everything, doesn't he, huh? You haven't read his book. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. You see the black? If you saw the movie 2001, do you see the black there worshiping his God? You go in the United Nations building, you see the black God in the meditation room? You go over to Israel, and you see where they built this, for the books, the Dead Sea Scrolls, this temple. They got this thing, the double parabolic curve with the black on the side for the entrance. I had time to go through the black. You want to get some tapes, you can do that. We got kind of long. Again, up the 7 steps, that's the worshipful master, God with us. The supreme sovereign commander, 33rd degree, directly under the sunburst, the eagle, which is the emblem of Baal, the serpents, you see, on both sides, and trail of the serpents, and the black. We see that black in Mecca, the Kaaba. I'm down one day, and I will tell you something about false religions. Every false religion has a problem. This is one of the problems with all the modern translations of the Bible. They are contradictory internally. They are not consistent. This is the proof that the King James, one of the proofs of it, is the fact that it is the only Bible that's internally consistent. You see what happens when you start writing a false one, you change here, change there, but you can't change too much, it becomes too obvious. So what you do is change the major text and hope people don't understand the minor ones. But if a person really gets down and study, he starts saying, wait a minute, this doesn't quite fit here. He has inconsistencies he cannot resolve. That's never true in the King James. There is total consistency from the very beginning to the end. Let's take a look here. One time I was in Atlanta, and we were having a little bite to eat Sunday afternoon, sitting with, I had plenty of time, and just sitting around 4 or 5 of us guys jawing away. And I was telling them a little bit about Mohammedanism. And we had, as I say, we were just spending an afternoon wasting time. Not really. We were talking about things we thought were important. And the waitress came over after about an hour of this, and she said, "Sir, I want to apologize." I said, "About what?" She said, "I've been listening to your conversation, and a good waitress never listens to the conversation of a customer." And she said, "But I couldn't help it. I'm a Mohammedan in Atlanta, Georgia, and there are not many Mohammedans around, and when I heard you talk of Muhammad, I had to listen in." I said, "That's quite all right." I said, "Miss, could I ask you some questions?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Now, would you say that Abraham was a prophet of God?" "Yes." "Ishmael?" "Yes." "Isaac?" "Yes." "Jacob?" "Yes." "David?" "Yes." "Solomon?" "Yes." "Christ?" "Yes." "Muhammad?" "Yes." All of these men were prophets of God? "Yes." Could they lie on spiritual matters? Well, no. That's not possible. Now, would you tell me who the greatest of all prophets? What do you think the answer is? Pardon? Jesus. Jesus of Nazareth is the greatest of all prophets. Did you know that's a Mohammedan position? Now, I want to ask you a question. Was Abraham God? No. Isaac? No. Ishmael? No. Jacob? No. Was Solomon? No. David? No. Muhammad? No. Christ? She stops and looks at me. I said, was Christ God or not God? If Christ be God, Muhammad be a liar. If Muhammad is right, then Christ is not God and Christ is a liar. Now, you told me that Christ was the greatest of all prophets. And she sits there and she says, "No man has ever talked to me like this." It's about time. I don't mean this with malice in my heart. I hope you understand. When I jump on something, I mean it. If possible, the Holy Spirit should bless it to your good. I have no other purpose of being here. All right. Those people marching 7 days around in that circle, you see them there? They marched for 7 days continuously around and around and around, chanting, chanting. And then they march out about 20 miles out to the hills out there and back to the different shrines. And they have to do that once in their lifetime. This is the big thing, the trip to Mecca. Oh. The nudity, always for paganism. This is Zeus in the United Nations building. Here's that same black. Pops up again. The United Nations meditation room. 100,000 volumes of the different lodges of the world in the basement of this building. We're not talking about a little club. We're talking about a massive organization with the threat of life and death over its membership. And secret extractions of oaths that are so abominable to our concept of justice and law, as well as Christian morality. Knight Templar magazine. This is the only copy I ever had of the Knight Templar. This is York, right? Let us thank God that in the days of religious wars, that's what the article's been about, long gone, and the spirit of cooperation and mutual appreciation has replaced antagonism and warfare among Christian bodies. The new word among churches in our days is ecumenism, which means the whole household of faith. That means let's all get together, non-sectarianism, all right? But let it be said to the everlasting glory of Masonry. Everlasting glory of Masonry. Here is a fraternity who realizes that God is called by different names, by different peoples. Masonry was still in advance of the church in ecumenism. Masonry includes all believers in God, regardless of the name of their religion. What is the Lord saying? For this is the stone which is set in knot of ye masons, which has become the head of the corner. For there is none other name given amongst men under heaven whereby ye must be saved. What do they say? any name, any religion, it makes no difference. Notice the direct opposition of the Word of God. In all cases, 180 degrees. In 1885, Rudyard Kipling was raised in Lahore India Lodge. And that's, by the way, that is one of the elite lodges. He said, I was entered by a Hindu, that's first degree, passed by a Muslim, second degree, raised by an Englishman, third degree, and the tiler, the keeper of the door, was a Jew. See, the Masons teach that the true religion is Masonry. All these others don't matter. Here again we have the degrees that of the Scottish Rite that came from the Kabbalah. The 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 12th, 14th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 25th, 26th, 28th, 29th, and 32nd. Do you want to know whether Masonry is Jewish? It came out of the 8th book of the Talmud. Here we have the emblem in the occult given of Lucifer. The horn deity, or the horn power, the torch of illumination, the 5-pointed star, which is the emblem also we'll see of him, the female breast, the male portion with the sunburst behind it and the serpent around it, the hooves, the eagle wing, the eagle being the emblem of Baal. And here we have this monstrosity. This is called the goat of Baphomet, symbol of Lucifer. We see the same thing in the 18th degree. With the red cross of the Rose Christ. By the way, the cross is not a Christian emblem. It's the Egyptian emblem of male fertility. All right? When you see it combined with a circle, you now have called the Ankh, the female and the male at the time of congenital conception. Here's Sir Winston joining in the Druids, which is the parent organization and founder of the Scottish Rite. The ancient order of the Druids, at least 2,500 years old. And Winston Churchill, 1908, as he said in his book, I've decided to join or told his mother, I've decided to join the religion of reasonable men. I've joined the religion of Disraeli, the only Jewish Prime Minister of England, or at least openly Jewish, known to be Jewish. The occult magazine, see the goat of both made. This is the 5-pointed star. Again, is the emblem of Lucifer. Let's go to Washington, D.C. Here we have the capital of the United States. Here's the Capitol building on Capitol Hill. Notice the lawns laid out and the 2 horns, the torch, the goat's head, the beard, and the compass, the ark, and the pinions. This is just a straight map. This is a standard old street map, Washington, D.C. This is the same street map. I just blew this part up here for you. Let's take a look here. Here we have the horn, the beard, and in the beard, the White House. Coming out of the White House, we come down here to the woman, the leg, you see? And the male shaft of Washington sticking in that portion. We go with the American Tobacco, or the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division of the Internal Revenue Service. And we'll notice something about this badge, which is on all their material. The badge number is 666, the mark of the beast. All right? The sunburst, the eagle, Lucifer, the hoodwinks, both corners, the square, the key, and the balance scale of works. Salvation by works. Let's take a look at your federal income taxes, 1970 edition. I thought this was kind of interesting. Let's take a move in on the center of this and take a look at the top of that. What do we see? Now let's take a look and see what we see here. We'll turn that sideways. The goat of Baphomet, the horn, the torch, the goat's head, and the goat's feet standing on the shaft, and the sunburst, and the male phallus below that. Let's look in the corner. We're still on the same little particle. We see the emblem, the acacia leaf that marks the Lucifer's mark, the branch, that leaf that's thrown in the mason's grave in the claim of the body. The clenched fist that the tail is in the form of. They shook their fist in the face of God. which forms the tail of the eagle, which is the emblem of Lucifer, or Baal, with the balance scale, which is the doctrine of works. We see things like this yin and the yang. Those of you who like acupuncture and this sort of thing, we get in yin and yang in. And the reason why you put those needles in, we've got to block a little yin and a little yang so the chi can flow. The chi, the life force, got to flow through you every day, but you got to be balanced between the positive and the negatives, you see. And if you got a little too much yin and a little too much yang, then your yin and yang are out of balance. And if your yin and yang is out of base, then the chi can't flow. So we're going to put a needle in here and a needle in here. We're going to block a little yin here and a little yang there. And so we get your yin and yang in balance, and then the chi flows through and you're healthy. You understand that? That's Hinduism. All right, now, you think that's funny? Well, let's take a look at the yin and yang symbol in another form. It comes in many forms. Sometimes you'll see a line like this and you'll see a picture of an old man, how he looked like, and he'd be here, and you'll see an exact copy in black down here. I don't know if you've ever seen that symbol. We see it in another form. It's this way. It's not going to come out quite right, but you're going to have to bear with me because I've got some problems here. Mainly the problems I got is that it doesn't going to come out right. But anyway, this part here should be, wait a minute, this should come through here.